Pharisees asked Jesus, "By what authority do you speak?" Or if we translate that a little bit, what's the basis for what you're doing? What's your foundation? Some of you may remember writing university essays, or high school essays for that matter, where you had to have a source of authority for everything you said. You were never expected to have an original idea. You had to find a quotation from somebody or other to put down to prove that this was a legitimate thought. And that's the kind of mentality that Jesus was confronted with. He couldn't speak on his own. He had to have an authority behind him. The authority of tradition, the authority of the temple, the authority of Rome, whatever it was. And the question for us is, what's our authority? What do we do? So, I'm going to start with a short public opinion survey here. Hands up everybody who believes that we live in a society of law and order. Nobody believes it? Yeah? Okay. It's not always perfect, but it's a society of law and order. All right. And you try to follow the laws as far as possible. Okay. How many of you have sung Happy Birthday at some time? Did you realize you were breaking the law?
Yes.
Because it's copyright, or it was. It's now in public domain. You shouldn't have sung it unless you got permission from the copyright holder and paid a royalty to that person. You all broke the law. You all say you belong. Now, hands up, how many people have never, ever gone over the speed limit between here and Vernon? Yeah, that's what I thought. So your willingness to break that law says that you're working with a higher authority than just what's on that post. And what is that authority? And how do you get it? That's the question I was trying to ask the kids. How do you decide? How do you choose what the meals are that you want? So, a little bit of dramatization here. A few years ago, there was a sociologist, philosopher, psychologist, who did some work with how people learn to make decisions. He called it moral development. And he worked mostly with children to see how they advanced and worked their way up into a more intentional way of making decisions. His name was Lawrence Kohlberg. It doesn't really matter who he is because almost all of them, I'll throw names out, Maslow, Erickson, Jim's favorite, Richard Rohr, all come up with this same pattern. And the very bottom layer, the ones that newborns deal with, is survival. That is, I need food, and I don't care if it's 2 o'clock in the morning. I'm going to get you up so I can get that food that I need. It's just a question of, I want it, I'm going to get it. No questions of right or wrong involved. Then the next stage, as kids grow up a little bit, is to obey. Mom says, don't touch that cookie. Mom is the authority. Now kids at that age don't ask whether stealing a cookie or taking a cookie is right or wrong. But they know that somebody has told them something and they obey. Or if they disobey, they risk punishment. You see, somebody who's 6 months old doesn't even think about punishment. It's only when you get to be 1 or 2 that you start thinking, ooh, I could get into trouble over this. Then the next stage up above that is rules. And kids start to realize that there are rules governing their life. And not only do they realize there are rules, which is not just that mom says, this is the way we do it. We always sit down for dinner at our house. That's a rule. This is when they create rules for themselves. And you got 2 of them in the back seat, and they draw an imaginary line down the middle of the back seat. And brother better not reach across that line. These are the rules. We had, in Toronto, Joan and I were part of a worship committee that was chaired for a while by the chief of the police union. And, you know, the rules for running a police union are not necessarily the same things as for running a church committee, but we ran the worship committee according to the rules of the Toronto Police Union. Because rules are rules. Joan and I remember that the day after my father died, we had to empty out the furniture from his room in the care facility he had been in. And the apartment that he was in, you were supposed to load the elevator in the basement. But when you've got a dolly with about 500 pounds of furniture loaded onto it, you cannot take it down a flight of stairs and down a narrow hall and around a sharp corner and then get into the elevator. Not possible. So we went in through the front door and wheeled it in, and the president of the owners of the condominium group said, the rules are you have to take it in by the basement. And we protested that, come on, have some compassion. Our father died yesterday. And he just sniffed, rules are rules, and would not catch our eye after that. That's this level, rule 3, level 3. The rules stand up regardless of circumstances. Somewhere above that, there's a stage where people start to recognize that there are underlying principles. For example, one principle might be that, yes, you would cheerfully break the speed limit if you're getting to the emergency ward with somebody who's injured. The rules may be there, but there's a higher principle that you follow. I keep finding these. Okay. I'm sorry, I got that one out of order because the boxes fell down. That's the one that comes above rules, social. And it's what will people think of me? Now this is, in child growing up, this is classic teenager. What's the peer pressure? What will my friends think of me if I do this or if I don't do this? With adults, it's much more likely to be, how is this going to affect my status in the community? Will people still respect me? Okay, now we come to principles, where you work on what's the principle. And then he came up with a 6th stage on the top, and he never gave it a name. Because he said he had never met anybody who got to that stage. But he was sure there would be one. Mike, when, what's his name, who was at Ryerson? He's been here speaking to us. He wrote a chapter for a book that Mike edited, and he talks about this level as being totally integrated. There are no ifs, ands, or buts. You are so integrated with everything that you know what's going to be the right or the wrong thing to say. When Lawrence Kohlberg, the psychologist, worked this out, he did it by asking a question for which there's no right answer. What he wanted to know was, why do you say this? And one of the classic questions was, suppose your infant daughter is sick, has a high fever, you know there's a medication that can save her, but it's late at night, the drugstore is closed, the pharmacist has gone away and has an unlisted number anyway. Would you break in and steal it? And you see the different answers here. The survival level wouldn't even think about whether it's right or wrong to break in and steal it. I need it, I'm going to get it. The obey one would be, I've been told that I shouldn't do this, but can I get away with it? Can I do it and not get punished? Somebody who's stuck in the rules level is simply going to say, no, it's wrong. I can't break in and steal something. Period. Somebody at the social level concerned what the reaction is going to be would be tossing things around. Suppose I break in and people find that I took this and my daughter doesn't die, and of course I can't prove that she would have died if she hadn't had that medication, and what would people think of me? Or on the other hand, is my reputation as an honest, law-abiding person so strong that I'm willing to risk the possibility that my daughter might not make it until the drugstore opens? At the level of principle, it's fairly clear. A human life matters more than any silly laws. Break in. Now notice that a high level and a very low level might come up with exactly the same answer. Yes, I'll break in. But for dramatically different reasons. The social and the obedience level might also come up with the same answer. They're not sure, they're balancing things. But again, for different reasons. This one because somebody said you shouldn't, and I'm afraid of punishment. And this one because I don't know what the effect will be. Okay, that's all the theory. My point is, I think, I hope it is, that we all rely on sources of authority. But are you aware of where the authority is coming from? Often you get people who will say, the Bible says, and therefore it must be right. Okay. This much of the Bible is at the survival level. It was written by people who did not ask, is this right or wrong? Or what's the principle behind this? Their only concern was survival. They wanted what they wanted and they went after it. Joshua didn't ask whether it was right or wrong to kill every inhabitant of Jericho, except one woman's family. That was just what you did when you were conquering. David did not ask questions of, is it right for me to send my men to bring Bathsheba from her bath and bring her to my palace so that I can have my pleasure with her? That came later when the prophet confronted him. He didn't ask if it's right for me to send Bathsheba's husband up to the front lines in a battle so he's going to get killed. I mean, first of all, it's murder, and secondly, it's abducting somebody else's wife. Didn't ask that question. He was the king, he had the right, he went ahead and did it. About this much of the Bible is level 2. This is the prophets. And the prophets invoked a powerful figure that they could stand behind. They always said, "Thus saith the Lord." It was not what Jeremiah thought or Isaiah thought. It came from God and you couldn't challenge it, therefore. And that's level 2, obedience. Back here is the New Testament. And the New Testament, a lot of it is still in a level 2 way of thinking. Remember the story of Jesus sending his disciples to go and gather a colt so he could ride into Jerusalem? And he said, if the servants ask you, "What are you doing?" just tell them, "The master needs it." You see, there's that authority figure. The master needs it. And so they said, "Go ahead." Because they're working in here where there's an authority who makes everything okay. The big boss. I guess some of you have probably worked for outfits where you did what the boss said even if you thought it was wrong. That's level 2. Obedience. An authority figure who tells you, an outside authority figure who tells you what to do. Now, the Pharisees who challenged Jesus about what authority do you use were probably in here at level 3. Moses gave them 613 laws to follow, and the Pharisees followed it to the best of their ability. That didn't mean they were perfect, but they did their best to follow it. The laws mattered. And where was Jesus? Who knows? He had mixtures of almost everything. He tells them to go and say that the master needs that coat. That's level 2. When he tells the story about the wedding banquet where the man invited the people in from under the bridges and the ditches and so on, he's saying the social expectations are this, and this guy breaks it. So he must be a higher level. The parable of the prodigal son is really interesting. Because the older son says, "What are you doing putting on a party for this kid who disgraced the family, took half your wealth, squandered it?" He's saying the rules require that he should be punished. And the father is clearly up here. Because the father says, "This was my son, and he was dead, and he's alive again." Life, love, relationship matters far more than the rules. Time's running out. The point is, on what basis do you make your decisions? Do you figure it out for yourself? Do you work from principles? Do you work from what this is going to do to what people think of you? Or do you just simply have a rule that you have to follow? I get suspicious anytime somebody tells me, "The Bible says so," because that's level 2. They're looking at an outside authority to make their decisions for them. I get suspicious when anybody says that an old creed says something or other, because the creed comes out of the rules, the law and order society, where they were trying to impose their will upon other people. What's the basis on which you make your decisions about who you are and what you do? Ordinarily, At this time, we would have music for meditation, but I would rather have you take a little bit of time to think on your own. So there will be a few moments of silence.